What a Ghost Wants, a Beachwood Harbor Ghost Mysteries prequel by Danielle Garrett. Narrated by Amanda Ronconi. Chapter 1. Scarlet, if you stay like that any longer, your head is going to start turning purple. You already look like a bat. Frowning, I lowered my phone to my chest and glanced across the room, toward the source of the seemingly disembodied voice, just in time for a slight shimmer of silver and purple to sharpen into the form of a spectral Himalayan cat. And yes, he was upside down. Or, more accurately, I was. Loath as I am to agree with Flapjack, you do look rather like a bat, Lady Scarlet. A second voice interjected, this one tinged with a formal Oxford accent. With a groan, I rolled myself over onto my stomach and sprawled further across the hotel bed. A coverlet with a rather atrocious floral pattern bunched up in a crumpled mess beneath my elbows, and I grumbled to myself as I tried to get comfortable again. Standing, or rather floating, in the two opposite corners were my two spectral traveling companions. Flapjack, the ghostly cat, perched on the low dresser, his silvery feather duster of a tail swaying in and out of the flat-screen TV. Hayward Kensington III hovered near the doorway to the small bathroom, and while he was dressed in the formal white tie attire of an old-world Englishman, he wore the petulant scowl of a small boy as he intermittently glanced at Flapjack. I'd sent them to their opposite corners a few minutes before, in an effort to preserve my sanity. "What are you doing, anyway?" Flapjack asked. "You've been moody ever since we got back from the coffee shop." At the reminder, I glanced over at the nightstand, where a paper cup sat, probably cold by now. "I was looking for return flights home," I told the ghosts. Flapjack canted his head. "Home? I thought this was home. Well, not here," he added, sending a scowl around the hotel room, as though it had personally offended him. It wasn't a 5-star retreat, but it was functional and mostly clean, but for a bit of dust behind the TV and some hard water stains in the bathroom. I'd certainly seen much worse. Hayward, however, had made a full running list of grievances upon our arrival 3 days ago, rattling them off as if giving a list of directives to his personal valet, which I suppose only went to show that old habits die hard, even after death. In life, Hayward was a proper 19th century lord, forever memorialized in his finest cravat and top hat, following his death at the Vienna Opera House. A round of enthusiastic applause and eager calls for an encore, combined with what I suspected was a generous amount of brandy, made for a tragic end when Hayward toppled from his balcony seat and plunged to the floor below. In my experience, he could have done a lot worse. I've met ghosts forever stuck in ratty bathrobes, mismatched shoes, and more than a few who wound up as involuntary spiritual nudists, a circumstance that always made for a somewhat disturbing find. Flapjack, of course, wore his birthday suit proudly, but then he was a cat. My childhood pet turned first haunting. He passed away 3 weeks before my 8th birthday, only to return to me after my birthday party, not only as a ghost, but a talking ghost. And he hasn't shut up since. "You've seen the listings," I replied to Flapjack, before sitting up, my legs folded underneath me. I grabbed for my phone and continued my search. "I thought this might be the place to put down roots, but all of the rentals are out of my budget." "Your grandma left you a pool of cold, hard cash, Scar. Live a little." "Lady Scarlet is being sensible," Hayward exclaimed. "Something you would know nothing about, of course." "I could afford it," I clarified, shaking my long copper-red hair from my face as I looked up. "But I need that money to last. Most businesses don't make a profit for the first year, sometimes even longer. And the last thing I want to do is get 6 months into this new venture and then have to go and ask Mom and Dad for a loan. I'm in my 30s now. I have to make this work on my own." "But your parents are loaded," Flapjack pointed out. Hayward pressed one gloved hand to his face, muttering to himself. "Whatever," Flapjack scoffed, glowering at Hayward with his silver eyes that had once burned as bright as sapphires in the sunlight. With ghosts, the colors of life faded sometime in the period between death and coming back, leaving all ghosts a shimmering, semi-translucent form in a silver-purple hue, and eye color was generally various shades of silver, regardless of what it might have been in life. Flapjack's eyes might have lost their jewel-toned glimmer, but they maintained all of their drama, and with his ghostly ability to speak, perhaps added a bit in the process. Lucky me. "I'm just a cat. What do I know, right?" "Ah, progress," Hayward said, lowering his hand. "Perhaps he has had a breakthrough." Flapjack growled, his haunches wiggling. "Enough!" I snapped. "You two promised me an hour of peace and quiet. Just let me get this ticket booked. Then we can go out and walk on the beach or something to kill time." Room 2B at the Seahorse Hotel might not be postcard-worthy, but the view from the large window wasn't half bad. The hotel caught a sliver of the harbor that served as the town's namesake, and the rest was ancient evergreens and cliffside. I'd found Beachwood Harbor mentioned on a travel blog, in an article listing 12 unspoiled gems along the west coast, little-known beach communities dotting the map, west of Highway 101, all the way from Southern California to BC, Canada. Having lived in Arizona most of my life, I was ready for something different. After school, I spent the better part of a decade traveling the world, but when my grandmother fell ill, I returned to Arizona and stayed until she passed. In her final days, she asked me what I wanted to do next, and I told her about my dream of moving somewhere new and opening my own flower shop. To my surprise, when she passed, her lawyer announced that a part of her estate had been earmarked for me to start my next adventure, one that would finally allow me to put down roots and give up my Rolling Stone days. However obscure Beachwood Harbor might be, there seemed to be no shortage of small businesses, making the commercial real estate market in the area more challenging than I'd anticipated. "Didn't you do research for weeks before we flew out here? If not, what were all those late-night computer searches about? Or do I not want to know?" Flapjack asked, with another swish of his tail. I narrowed my eyes at him. Yes, of course I did my research, but the listing I originally found got scooped up somewhere between the time I bought my ticket and now. I just assumed there would be more options. "I'm sure something will turn up, Lady Scarlet," Hayward chimed in, ever the optimist. "Oh, sure. Real estate is just falling out of the sky these days." "You're right," I told Hayward, ignoring Flapjack's scoff. "Something might come around, but I can't stay here racking up charges at the motel while I wait." I hesitated, glancing down at the checkout form on my phone screen. One click and I'd be heading back to Arizona tomorrow at first light. My stomach cinched into a tighter knot. Although, I did see an ad for a local real estate agent on a bus stop bench. Maybe there's a pocket listing, something that hasn't come on the market yet? Hayward smiled, his bristled salt and pepper mustache twitching as light filled his silver eyes. "I'd say it's worth a shot, Lady Scarlet." I tapped away from the airline's website, stood from the bed, and slipped the phone into the back pocket of my jeans. "All right, one more try." Flapjack slinked across the room and peered out the window. He squinted against the late afternoon sun, his whiskers twitching. I don't know why you even want to stay here. I mean, what are you going to do when you're not shoving dead flowers into vases? I don't even think we saw a movie theater. I smiled and pulled on my light rain jacket. I think that's kind of the point, Flapjack. It's about getting back to basics and living a more simple life. What's the fun in that? Hayward chuckled softly. The simplicity might do you some good, Cat. You could use some time spent in quiet reflection, pondering the state of your soul. Flapjack turned, narrowing his eyes in Hayward's direction. His lips peeled back, revealing plenty of silver teeth. And just what is wrong with my soul? Hayward stared at the cat, unblinking. Well, I wouldn't even know where to begin, now would I? Sensing the flames of their previous argument sparking back to life, I stepped between them, extending a hand in either direction. Nope, we don't have time for this. We're going to get over to the real estate agent's office before they close. And then I need to make a decision about this plane ticket. I also need something to eat before this headache gets any worse. I gave each of the ghosts a meaningful look, silently reminding them that the beginnings of the headache were, in fact, their fault. So you can either stay here and keep arguing, or you can come with me. You can't do both. Hayward rose to his full height, and then some, given that his polished wingtips were already a few inches off the floor. He straightened his cravat and then adjusted his top hat, ensuring all of his regalia was in proper order. What sort of gentleman would I be to let you wander the streets alone, Lady Scarlet? Of course I shall accompany you. Well, if Mr. Stuffy Shirt is going, then I am too, Flapjack announced, already propelling himself toward the door. Chapter 2. The nice thing about small towns, in addition to the low levels of traffic and light pollution, was that most everything was available within walking distance. The real estate office was no exception, and it was only a few minutes' walk from the hotel. However, upon arriving, I was quickly reminded of one of the major drawbacks of a small town, as I found a "Be back in 15 minutes" sign taped to the glass front door. Okay, I sighed, sneaking a glance at my watch. With no clock or approximate time of return, it was anyone's guess whether we were closer to 1 minute or 14. In either case, I decided there was enough time to backtrack and follow my nose, which had picked up the mouth-watering scent of fresh waffle cones on the way to the real estate office. As a general rule, I tried not to talk to my ghostly companions when out in public. Under duress, I would use a small Bluetooth-powered earbud and do my best to make it seem like I was talking to someone on the phone, but that tactic was reserved for more pressing emergencies. So, without announcing my plans, I turned and headed for the ice cream parlor, leaving my ghostly companions trailing in my wake. You know what we should really do before we decide whether this is the right place for us or not? Flapjack began. Is see if there's a fish market of some sort. Being this close to the harbor, there must be some sort of cannery. Don't you think, Scar? I rolled my eyes, as he knew not to expect a verbal reply. I wonder if they have some sort of tour guide we might employ, Hayward mused, his gloved hands clasped together as he surged past me on the sidewalk, looking around intently, as though the signage for a tour guide company might suddenly unfurl from the drizzly gray sky. We don't need a tour guide, Flapjack scoffed. This town is the size of a postage stamp. Even with your terrible sense of direction, we should be able to manage on our own. His tail swished back and forth as he strode down the sidewalk, only to leap into a supernaturally powered arc and land on top of a row of carefully trimmed boxwood bushes lining the space below a shop window. Hayward turned, likely prepared to admonish the cat, when something caught his attention, and the ghostly gentleman stopped dead in his tracks. No pun intended. Flapjack continued on, prancing along the neatly trimmed boxwoods as though they'd been placed there solely to serve as his own personal runway. "Remember that time you told Scarlett to get on the wrong bus? And we ended up halfway to the British Museum, when we meant to be going to Buckingham Palace?" Flapjack snickered to himself. I caught up to them just as Flapjack realized his joke hadn't drawn Hayward's ire. The cat turned around to look back as I reached Hayward's side. He stood as still as one of the prestigious guards outside the aforementioned Buckingham Palace, rigid and at full attention. His eyes stared through the window of the Lucky Lady Salon, which, from the almost cartoonish gold silhouette painted on the front door and the hot pink feather boa strung along the inside of the front window, seemed like the type of place one might go if they were looking for a 90s era-inspired glamour shots look. "Hayward, are you—" I stopped short upon seeing what, or who, had caught the gentleman's attention. There, in the middle of the bustling salon, with nary a chair unoccupied, stood the purple-hued silhouette of a young woman, who at first glance appeared to have died somewhere in the late 70s, complete with Farrah Fawcett waves, feather earrings, and a floral print romper that showed off her mile-long legs, ending in little strappy sandals. She was the only ghost in the shop, flitting around from chair to chair like a honeybee collecting pollen on a bright spring afternoon. "Oh, so you do still have a pulse somewhere in that chest of yours?" Flapjack taunted, as he came to a stop at Hayward's other side. "Want me to be your wingman? I promise not to tell her about how much you snore. Or that you couldn't carry a tune in a bucket, even if the handle was gorilla glued to your fingertips." Hayward jerked back, startled by both the cat's question and my sudden presence. Within the salon, the hippie ghost seemed blissfully unaware, far too caught up in whatever conversation was swirling around the interior of the busy shop. Hayward's thick mustache twitched.
"Oh, I'm quite sorry, Lady Scarlett. Do carry on."
I cocked an eyebrow at him. "Do you want to go and introduce yourself?"
"What? Oh, no. I mean, she is rather striking, isn't she?"
Hayward mumbled, as his silvery cheeks darkened a shade. In life, I imagined a blush fanning across his weathered features, in what I could only assume would have been a rare occurrence for the regal lord. "Come on, stuffy britches. I'll talk you up." Flapjack made to walk through the plate glass window, only for Hayward to snag him around the middle at the last moment and yank him back to our side of the window.
"You will do no such thing."
Just as quickly as he'd grabbed the cat, Hayward released him, jerking backward and muttering in flustered and choppy fragments of an apology. Flapjack, stunned into silence, which was yet another rare occurrence indeed, stared up at Hayward, blinking rapidly. "Uh-oh, Scarlett. I think I broke Hayward." "Leave him alone, Flapjack. Come on, I'm getting an ice cream cone." It wasn't until I started walking again that I realized I had been talking to the ghosts out loud, and a man sitting on a bench near a bus stop had looked from his newspaper to stare at me. Heat washed over my cheeks, and I ducked my chin, concealing my face behind my rather limp tresses that hung past my shoulders as I scurried to the end of the sidewalk and swung around the corner into the ice cream shop. Luckily, a double scoop of rocky road and a fresh waffle cone went a long way toward assuaging my embarrassment. I was nearly through with the first scoop when I glanced down at my watch, wondering if the real estate agent might have returned to her shop, only to look up and find the feather-haired ghost floating right through the parlor's front door. Hayward had his back toward the windows, admiring the wall art, and I looked to Flapjack, prepared to issue a warning, when the ghost spoke first. "Well, isn't this a nice surprise? We don't often get new faces around here. I'm Gwen." Hayward jolted so severely at the honeyed voice of the woman that his top hat tumbled right off his head. He whirled around, catching it just before it hit the black and white checkered floor, and met the woman's beaming smile with a stammered greeting. Gwen thrust her hand outstretched toward Hayward. "Sorry, I didn't mean to scare you half to death. You'd think being a ghost I'd have a better handle on that, right?" She laughed at her own little joke, her voice sounding almost musical. Her feathered earrings swayed, the tips nearly brushing her bare shoulders, and I could tell Hayward was having a hard time deciding where to look. In his era, women weren't permitted to show so much as an ankle to a strange man, let alone long, toned legs and bare collarbones under a tank top or halter-style top. Granted, Hayward had been dead long enough and traveled enough of the modern world to adjust to modern fashion, but something about Gwen struck him all the way off course. Flapjack snickered, and I did my best to ignore him, biting back the admonishment I normally would have given. One of the hardest things about seeing and speaking with ghosts is pretending they don't exist. But the last thing I wanted was to attract the attention of whatever spirits might be lingering in the small town. Not to mention the part about looking a little kooky if I garnered a reputation for talking to myself in public.
"You're quite all right,"
Hayward said, finally gathering himself enough to take the woman's hand. He lifted it toward his face, stopping just short of kissing her knuckles, as he deeply inclined his head, low enough that I feared the top hat might take a second tumble.
"I am Lord Hayward Kensington III,
he said, as he met her gaze once more and released her hand. Gwen smiled, then looked over at Flapjack. "And who is this little guy? I don't think I've ever seen someone who had a pet ghost. You must have been very close in life if his spirit found yours on this side of things." "First of all, I'm not little," Flapjack interjected. Gwen yelped, clutching at her chest as she surged backwards so far she momentarily vanished through the ice cream parlor's wall, before shimmering back into view.
"My deepest apologies, Lady Gwen,"
Hayward said, giving Flapjack a look so intense that if the cat weren't already dead, I might fear for his bodily safety.
"He's nothing more than a scoundrel, and I have no claim to him."
"That was hurtful," Flapjack said, his tone dry as kindling in July. "You hear that, Scar? Stuffy Britches doesn't claim me." I stared at a point on the wall past the ghosts and took another bite of my ice cream cone. Gwen crumpled, swooping closer to Flapjack. "Oh, dear, are you a new ghost? You should know. That one," she gestured in my general direction, "is still alive, and she can't hear you. Believe me, I've tried to find a way to close the gap, so to speak." My eyes burned as I forced them to keep from looking at Flapjack with silent pleading. "Were you her kitty? Before? I mean," Gwen asked gently. I bit into my waffle cone. "Oh, come on, Scarlet," Flapjack groaned. "If you're going to move here, your little secret's going to get out sooner or later, and she doesn't seem to mind." To prove his point, Flapjack vaulted onto my table and danced around in front of me, swishing his tail dangerously close to my ice cream. In a moment of sheer reflex, I hoisted the cone out of his path. Gwen gasped. My eyes squeezed shut. "Now, say, if you're a local, You can tell me this. What's the quickest way to the local cannery? Flapjack asked, still shaking what his mama kitty gave him. Gwen ignored the question about Flapjack's mission to find as much fish as humanly, or ghostly, possible, and stared at me, her silvery eyes wide.
You can see us?
Oh boy, here we go. Chapter 3. Flapjack, I muttered out of the corner of my mouth as my eyes darted to the front counter, where the young man who'd served up my double-scoop cone stood near the register. Fortunately, his attention appeared to be firmly fixated on the phone in his hand.
What are you? Oh, you must be a witch,
Gwen exclaimed, her silvery eyes alight as they zipped between Hayward, Flapjack, and me.
This is so exciting. Lady Scarlet is no witch,
Hayward bellowed, his mustache twitching furiously as the dreamy adoration in his eyes vanished. Gwen flinched and jerked backward, nearly passing through the wall a second time.
I meant no offense.
I held up a hand. It's okay, Hayward. The young man at the counter didn't glance up at my voice, but I decided it was time to take this conversation outside all the same. Even with the soft pop music playing from the cotton candy-colored jukebox in the corner, it felt too quiet. Wrapping an extra napkin around the cone, I scurried toward the door. A twinkling chime jangled as I threw it open and stepped outside. The clouds had broken, and anemic rays of sunlight glimmered over the rain-soaked sidewalk. I'm not a witch, I reiterated to the ghost as she appeared in front of me, her hair and feather earrings swaying as though caught on the salty breeze. But yes, I can see you. I sent another glower in Flapjack's direction, but he was busy prancing atop the boxwoods again. Impossible feline. Gwen's previous excitement rebounded, a wide smile stretching across her beautiful face.
How wonderful! And are you just visiting, or are you new in town?
Hesitating, I looked past Gwen to scan the sidewalk in both directions. A couple with a baby stroller were on the opposite side of the street, taking a leisurely pace as they passed what appeared to be the town's grocery store. A broomstick and little bats hung suspended in the front window over a large crate filled with shiny orange pumpkins. A woman dressed in a long-sleeve shirt, puffer vest, and wide fleece headband power-walked in the other direction, while a small, cream-colored terrier strained at the end of the leash in her hand, attempting to dart ahead and chase a squirrel up one of the skinny trees planted alongside the street. "What's it to you?" Flapjack asked, while I surveyed the street. He hopped down from his catwalk and floated over toward Gwen, his eyes narrowed. "You head of the neighborhood watch or something?" Gwen smiled at him, which I knew from experience would only irritate him further, and reached out as though to stroke his silky fur.
I can tell we're going to be friends.
Flapjack recoiled before Gwen's fingers could brush under his chin. "Scarlet, don't we have an appointment to get to?" Gwen straightened at this.
An appointment? With who? Maybe I can show you the way.
The couple with the stroller went inside the market, and the woman with the terrier passed by, tugging the leash as the poor creature reluctantly gave up its pursuit of the squirrel. "I'm hoping to speak with the real estate agent in town," I told Gwen. "I'm looking to open a flower shop and need a commercial space to lease." Gwen rocketed a solid foot off the sidewalk, her hands clasped together.
A flower shop? Oh, how perfect! I love flowers.
"I believe that's apparent to anyone who has eyes," Flapjack commented dryly, giving Gwen's floral romper a scathing look. Hayward, on the other hand, appeared to be doing everything in his power not to look at Gwen's romper, or the bare legs sticking out from underneath it. Though at least his irritation on my behalf over being called a witch seemed to have faded.
It's going to be a lovely store. Would you happen to know of any available shops?
Sure. Are you going to talk to Sandy? That's the real estate agent, right? Gwen nodded. Her sign said she'd be back in 15 minutes.
Ooh, I wonder what she's up to. I wonder if she's taken up with that lumberjack of a delivery driver.
Her expression turned dreamy as one finger twirled through her perpetually perfect hair. Then, glancing back at us, she leaned in a little closer, her eyes wider still. They used to make out in his truck whenever he passed through on his route. She'd call it her lunch break, but we all knew what she was really up to. I was afraid to ask who she meant by we. Gwen started to drift down the sidewalk in the direction of the real estate office. Just then, a twinkling chime sounded, and the door of the neighboring beauty salon opened. 2 women in aprons stepped out, one extending a pack of cigarettes to the other as they started down the sidewalk side by side. Hold that thought. Gwen surged ahead after them. I'll be back in a bit, she called over her shoulder. Their smoke break is when they give all the real gossip, and I'm dying to know what they think about the Davenport affair. Tracy, that's the blonde, cuts Morgan Davenport's hair, and Lainey, the brunette, she sees Morgan's sister, Harper. Now, here's the juicy part. Morgan has been carrying on an affair with Harper's husband, and Tracy just overheard Morgan talking about it while she was in the shampoo bowl. I've been waiting for months for this day to come. With that, the vibrant ghost vanished around a corner into a narrow alleyway between the hair salon and the next row of shops on the main strip through town, her voice echoing, "It was so nice to meet you," as she went. Flapjack, Hayward, and I all stood, mouths agape for an extended moment, feeling a little like we'd been picked up in a whirlwind and shaken up before being dropped back down to the sidewalk again. What in the world was that? Flapjack asked. Hayward adjusted his top hat.
I'm not quite sure what to make of that, to be quite plain.
Well, yes, please be plain, Hayward. I wouldn't know what to do if you suddenly went zany on us, Flapjack quipped. I blinked a few times, willing the soap opera-worthy gossip to erase from my mind, then rounded on the ghost cat. As for you, I was serious when I said I didn't want to get involved in any ghost business while in town. When are you going to learn to keep your mouth shut? Hayward snorted in a rather ungentlemanly fashion.
I'm rather afraid. That's like asking Sisyphus when he might stop toiling about with all that rock business.
I rolled my eyes, only to flinch and swear loudly as a glob of melted chocolate spilled onto my hand and slid down my wrist. A middle-aged woman with shoulder-length honey-blonde hair and thick tortoiseshell glasses looked up from her computer as I breezed into the real estate office a few minutes later. The ends of her hair curled out slightly where they met her shoulders, and for some reason she reminded me of a mom from a 90s-era sitcom. "Afternoon," she said, offering a polite smile as she got to her feet. "Can I help you?" "Yes, hello." I moved quickly to her desk and took her extended hand, shaking it briefly. "My name is Scarlett Sanderson, and I'm looking to get a little help finding a commercial space to lease." The woman smiled and gestured at an empty seat. "I'd be delighted to help. My name is Sandy Dutton. Why don't you tell me about your needs?" "I'm planning to open a flower shop." Flapjack and Hayward flitted to the left side of the office where a large bulletin board showed dozens of printed listings pinned into 2 sections, one residential and one commercial. "Look at this, Scar. There is a cannery, and it's up for lease. Are you sure about this whole flower business? Seems in a town like this, fish might be the smarter business idea." Hayward shook his head.
Don't listen to him, Lady Scarlet. Your flower shop is going to be a smashing success. I can already tell.
Ignoring them both, I took a seat when Sandy gestured to one of the 2 chairs opposite hers. A flower shop? Well, that sounds lovely. It's been some time since this town's had a proper florist. Of course, Thistle has a flower department, and Mary does what she can, but she's not formally trained. Her main department is the meat and cheese counter. I blinked. Sandy chuckled politely. Let's just say, most folks opt for an out-of-town florist if they want anything more extravagant than simple bouquets or a dozen roses. You'll be a welcome addition to Beachwood Harbor. You hear that, Flapjack? Hayward taunted. Glad to hear it, I told Sandy. To tell you the truth, I've been a little discouraged. There was a place up for lease when I bought my plane ticket up here, but when I arrived, the owner told me they'd already found a tenant. I've seen a few other listings from the paper, and while some of them would certainly fit my needs, if not maybe a little too big, they're all out of my price range. I was hoping you might have the inside scoop on something a little more affordable. Was that the Ivy Lane property? Sandy asked, pushing her glasses up the bridge of her nose, her gaze drifting to her computer screen. It was. I had a feeling that one would go pretty quickly. She poised her fingers over her keyboard, then gave me a knowing smile. I'm sure we can find something, though. Beachwood Harbor is a tight-knit community and folks don't often leave. It does make it a bit tricky to find just the right space for a new business, as things don't turn over as quickly as they might in other places. She began scanning a list, the reflection of it shining off the lenses of her glasses. There are a few developers working to build new properties, but that's all kind of sticky business with the city commission and whatnot. There's a significant percentage of folks in town who don't want things to expand and grow, so it's a bit of a tug-of-war situation. She paused her scrolling and grabbed for a pen lying to the side of her keyboard. Are you okay with venturing off the beaten path a ways, or do you only want something on the main streets through town? I mean, I'm hoping for some manner of foot traffic, of course, but I suppose a little ways out would be okay, too. Sandy bobbed her head, jotted a note, then kept scrolling. And what's your budget? Wincing, I offered up the price range I had calculated prior to purchasing my plane tickets. The inheritance money from my grandmother was not a small sum, but I wanted to play it safe. Not to mention, there were a few big-ticket items I would need to purchase to get started. In a perfect world, I would also have enough left over to buy a delivery van, and maybe even have it wrapped with my shop's name, number, and website. But I could make do in the meantime, if needed. I had a car back in Arizona I could drive up and use until I got in the black. Sandy entered the information into her software, and we carried on a pleasant conversation as she searched and combed through the listings in her database. There was an old flower shop in a neighboring town, but when she showed me the listing photos, it was clear the shop would need to be overhauled and was in a rather remote location. I had envisioned a shop where I could sell greeting cards and gift items to help boost profits, which meant some manner of foot traffic was essential. After that, Sandy showed me a few other properties in Beachwood proper, but all of them stretched toward the end of my budget and weren't exactly what I was looking for. A former pizza parlor was too large, a former shoe store was too small, and an old mechanic shop too dirty. Sandy's face retained its determined look, even as she continued the search. You know, sometimes things come onto the market unexpectedly. I could do some asking around and see if anyone knows they have tenants not planning to renew their existing leases. When were you planning to move? What about this one? Flapjack asked, zooming closer to the assortment of listings tacked to the bulletin board. Hayward swatted out with one gloved hand, batting away the cat's fluffy tail.
As much as it pains me to say, the cat might be onto something here, Lady Scarlet. It even comes with a small dwelling above the shop. That's quite convenient.
I don't really have a super firm timeline, I replied to Sandy. Rising from my seat, I sauntered over to the listings to see for myself, and shut the ghostly duo up. I was hoping to get somewhat established before wedding season, so hopefully by late winter or early spring. Hayward gestured at the listing in question, and I noted it was tacked up in such a way that 3 other listings nearly covered it. I unpinned it and pulled it free, studying it more closely. Hayward and Flapjack rearranged themselves to be the devil and angel on my shoulders. It was clear which fit into either role.
Look, it's on Hydrangea Lane,
Hayward cooed.
That seems quite fortuitous.
It was a small shop, but well appointed, with a clearly defined retail space, a storeroom in the back, and then the overhead apartment that was not pictured, but listed as a line item, boasting 1 bedroom and 1 bathroom, with baseboard heating and generous closet space. Turning back to Sandy, I held up the sheet of paper. What about... She cringed.
Oh, I'm not sure you'd want that one.
I frowned and studied the listing anew. The square footage was in the right ballpark. It had a nice display window and exposed wood beams, which lent a cozy cottage vibe. The storeroom looked big enough for a decent-sized work table. I'd have to buy a cooler, but I'd already factored that into my budgeting. Plus, having a small 1-bedroom apartment included made the deal seem like a no-brainer. What was I missing? It maybe needs some paint and the floor could use a fresh wax, but otherwise it seems pretty close to perfect. I glanced up. Sandy's face was frozen. Her brows cinched together as her lips pursed and twisted to one side. What is it? Sandy leaned forward and lowered her voice.
Someone was killed there. And now, well, people think it's just a little... She lifted her hand, her thumb and forefinger pinched nearly together. Haunted?
Flapjack snorted. Oh, is that all? Seems like it's just the place for you, then. Eh, Scar?
Why me?
Chapter 4. Well, this place doesn't look exactly the way it did in the advertisement, does it? I asked, holding up the faded printout to compare to the vacant room before me. You're among friends, Scar. You can say it. It's a dump, Flapjack declared, his glowing eyes roving about the vacant retail space with more than a dash of skepticism. The floors needed more than a polish. It would take a complete refinishing job to get the wood planks back to their former glory, with quite a few in need of replacement due to deep gouges and scratches. Likewise, the beams overhead were in rough shape, walking the fine line between rustic and ready to be turned into termite chow. The windows were large and flooded the place with natural light, but they were caked with grime, and the trim along the bottom of the one on the right side of the door showed signs of water damage at the corner. Several places on the walls looked like they'd had holes repaired, but the drywall wasn't finished right, leaving smooth patches in the paint. It was also filthy.
Oh dear,
Hayward said, coming to a stop beside me. He took a handkerchief from a pocket inside his tuxedo jacket, absently wiping his brow.
This is in quite a state, isn't it?
Do we even dare go upstairs to the apartment? Flapjack asked, his ghost eyes rolling to the ceiling, even as his semi-transparent body began to float upward. My nose scrunched. I honestly wasn't sure how to answer that question. It's a good size, at least, I replied, my voice thin. And the front counter looks solid. We passed through the shop and peeked into the back, which would serve nicely as a studio space. It wasn't large enough to install a table and chairs for consultations, but there was enough room in the front. The back door led to a small parking lot where all spots were marked as reserved for tenants, so at least there would be a dedicated place to park, which would be essential for loading deliveries. The back room had a small powder room and another room that looked more like a closet, but given the lack of hanging bars was perhaps intended as an office? What fun, Flapjack purred as he peered over my shoulder into the tiny room. It'll be like doing paperwork in a coffin. How cozy. I glowered at him and closed the door. I can just use it for storage. There's no rule that says paperwork has to be done in an office anyway. The only door left unopened was a metal security door, wedged in the opposite corner of the back room. Maybe one of you should go upstairs first, I said, turning to the ghosts. Flapjack chose that moment to shove his head through the wall, leaving only his furry rear end in the maybe-possibly flower shop. I folded my arms. Flapjack, what are you doing? What does it look like I'm doing? Came his muffled reply. Tossing my hands into the air, I scoffed. Honestly, I have no idea. Shifting my attention to Hayward, my ever-so-stalwart companion, I softened my tone. Would you mind, Hayward? I just can't shake this image of a room filled with all manner of creepy crawlies and a fridge full of rotting food. Hayward tipped his chin.
It would be my honor, Lady Scarlet. You stay right here, and I'll return momentarily.
The Englishman rocketed from the battered floors and vanished into the ceiling. Flapjack pulled himself back from the wall and scoffed. Sucker, he muttered at Hayward's disappearing souls.
I heard that,
came Hayward's reply. What's so interesting next door? I asked the cat. Looks like the break room for the bank next door, and a lady in a suit was warming up something that smelled like tuna surprise. He licked his whiskers. You're impossible. I shook my head. You're supposed to be helping me figure out what to do here? On a scale of 1 to 10, how bad of an idea is it to turn a crime scene into a flower shop? Flapjack swished his tail as he sauntered across the front counter. You haven't signed any paperwork yet, so I'd say there's still time to run for your life. I exhaled, my shoulders rolling forward as I slumped. So that's a 10, then? Flapjack considered the vacant shop. I nodded, picking up his train of thought. You're probably right. I usually am. This was all kind of impulsive. I should go back home and do more research. Maybe setting up shop in Tucson wouldn't be the end of the world. Mom could undoubtedly guilt all her snooty friends into throwing me some business. And you know that crowd has an almost never-ending need for floral arrangements. I suppressed the urge to shudder at the thought of stuffy brunches, puffed-up bridal showers, and saccharine-sweet baby showers. My family was well off and ran in some obscenely wealthy circles. And while I'd never personally liked all the fanfare, for the majority of my childhood, I hadn't been given a choice but to participate on some level. Flapjack stopped, slowly turning back to face me, then plopped into a sitting position in the center of the counter. What? I asked, when he wouldn't stop staring at me. This isn't like you. To just give up and go home? What's going on? What did you do with the real Scarlet? I snorted a dry, humorless laugh. I'm not giving up. I'm still opening my flower shop. It's what Grandma wanted, and I do too. But I want to be smart about it, and not get in over my head just because I'm borderline desperate to get out of Arizona. All right, Then, crime scene aside, what do you think of the place? I smiled. I think it puts just the right amount of miles between me and Mom. Flapjack chuckled, the sound a wheezy sort of cough. I like it, I continued. The town, I mean. I've always loved the beach, and this place is really charming. But in typical Scarlet fashion, I may have raced in head first and got my skis out too far ahead of me. Well, at least this time you didn't end up with a broken collarbone, Flapjack quipped. I cringed at the reminder of an ill-fated trip in Switzerland. I'd been trying to impress my handsome ski instructor and wound up spending the better part of the weekend with the surly on-call nurse hired by the hotel to attend to the clumsier guests. Exactly, I said with a soft chuckle, even as my fingertips instinctively went to my collarbone. I'm not giving up, I'm just maybe taking a step back to reevaluate. Yeah, a step all the way back to Tucson and into your mother's clutches, Flapjack teased. I rolled my eyes. She's not a kingfisher, Flapjack. Before Flapjack could ridicule me further, Hayward floated down from his excursion to the apartment, his face a paler shade of silver than usual. My face crumpled into a wince, awaiting his official declaration. Okay, how bad is it? Are there bloodstains? Please tell me there aren't any bloodstains.
No, nothing of the sort, Lady Scarlet. But, however, there is... Before Hayward could finish his thought, a second set of legs descended through the ceiling and joined us in the empty retail space. The ghost of a woman, somewhere in her 30s, if I had to guess, with slightly disheveled hair spilling past her shoulders, stood in a pair of what appeared to be men's boxer shorts and an oversized t-shirt, staring at me, wide-eyed. So, it's true, then? My gaze shifted to Hayward. He removed his top hat and passed it back and forth between his hands. You can see me? Hear me? The woman continued, her eyes growing ever wider. She floated a little closer, and I took a quick step back. Ghosts couldn't generally touch the living, let alone hurt them. But there was an unsettling icy sensation that followed any point of contact with one. You can, the woman cried, answering her own question. Oh, this is so... She stopped short, her face twisting into an almost pained expression as she struggled to find the right word, which was quite relatable. I held up a hand. I know, I said, rescuing her from her indecision. My name is Scarlett Sanderson, and this is Flapjack. I gestured at Flapjack, who still sat perched on the front counter, his tail swinging slowly behind him. And it seems you have already met Hayward here. He placed his top hat back on his well-groomed head of salt and pepper hair, then extended a gloved hand towards the new arrival to make a more formal introduction than the one they apparently shared upstairs. How come Hayward gets a pass when it comes to blowing your cover, but I got the death stare back at the ice cream shop? Flapjack interjected. Hayward puffed his chest out. I've told you before, Lady Scarlet likes me best.
Flapjack hissed. Knock it off, you two, I groaned. Sorry about them. I'd say they're normally on better behavior, but that would be a lie. The ghost barely seemed to notice the other two, as she was too busy staring at me, mouth agape. I'm assuming you're the one who was, killed here? I asked, wincing at the bluntness of my own question. But hey, in for a penny, in for a pound, and all that. Hayward released the woman's hand, and she nodded. Sarah Durham, I suppose you've seen the articles about me? No, actually, I'm only visiting for now. I'm hoping to move to Beachwood Harbor and open a flower shop. This place is up for rent. The real estate agent, Sandy, told me the owners have had some trouble renting it out following your murder. Apparently, folks think there's some bad omens here. Sarah scoffed. That's rich. The only bad omen is Alvin. Who's that? He's the landlord, and the person who murdered me. Half the town knows he did it, but the police refuse to lock him up. Flapjack stalked closer. Oh, this is getting good. If ghosts had the power to conjure items at will, I had no doubt a bucket of butter-drenched popcorn would wink into existence at Flapjack's side. Wait, you're saying the owner of this rental is the one who killed you? Sarah nodded, then turned toward the front window, staring vacantly out at the largely empty street. I'm not sure how long it's been, she began, her voice taking on a far-off tone. Time passes so strangely on this side of things. I've barely left the shop since it happened, you know? There's this other ghost who comes around sometimes and tries to get me to come out and meet other ghosts or go around town with her, but I just can't bring myself to leave. Anytime I do, it's like I have bugs crawling under my skin or something. This restless, itchy feeling until I get back here again. She paused for a moment before turning around to face me once more. You know about ghosts. Is that normal? Why can't I leave here without feeling like I want to claw something? I don't mean to interrupt, but this ghost who visits you, does she have long blonde hair? Hayward asked. Flapjack rolled his eyes. Way to stay on topic, Hayward. Sarah ignored Flapjack's interjection, and turning to Hayward, she nodded. Gwen, do you know her? A flush of purple silver washed over Hayward's cheeks, and he absently reached toward his top hat once more before stopping himself and adjusting his cravat instead. No, they're with me, I said. We only met Gwen this afternoon. I'm surprised she didn't tell you about me. I swear she knows everything that goes on in this town, about both the living and the dead. A small smile tugged at the corner of my lips. I kind of picked up on that. As to your question, I've heard of similar reactions before. I have a theory, but of course it's not something I can really prove. Sarah nodded. I'd like to hear it anyway. Well, sometimes I think ghosts end up rooted to a place that was significant to them in life. Or, in some cases, the place they died. Maybe this place was significant enough for you in both life and death that your soul is somewhat tethered. It's an encouraging sign that you can leave at all. At least you're not bound here permanently. Tethered? Sarah's mouth pinched, almost like that of a small child trying a sour lemon candy for the first time. How do I break it? I don't want to be a ghost, of course, but it doesn't seem like I can do much about that. If I could at least be a little more free, like Gwen, maybe that would help. Did you live here in the upstairs apartment? Sarah nodded. For 5 years. I ran a vintage clothing boutique and lived upstairs, and as you already seem to know, this is also where I died. Right, so you clearly spent a lot of time here. It was a significant place to you in life. It makes sense that your soul is having a little trouble letting go. But that's not to say it's forever. I snapped my mouth closed, stopping short of any sort of promise or shred of hope. Flapjack leaned over, his ears pinned forward, waiting for my next words. Could what? Sarah repeated, floating closer, her voice lilting towards hysteria. Could you help me? Could you get me out of here once and for all? A flicker of light cut through the shadows on the floor, and I, along with the 3 spectral figures, snapped to attention. Half a second before we all whirled around and found someone walking through the door. Sarah swore, then vanished, into an explosion of silvery dust. Chapter 5. The woman in the doorway shrank back. She was petite, with long dark hair that hung loose around her face and shoulders, and wide doe eyes. "I'm so sorry," she stammered. "I didn't mean to startle you." My hand was clenched to my chest, doing its best to keep my heart from launching out of my ribcage. "It's okay. I'm Daisy Hastings," she said, taking a quick step toward me. She stretched out her hand and offered a fleeting smile. "Sandy called to say someone was looking at the property, so I thought I'd come by and see if you had any questions." Recognition dawned, and my heart slowly started to return to normal. I shook her hand. "It's nice to meet you. My name is Scarlett. I'm potentially moving here to open a flower shop." Unbeknownst to the woman standing before me, Flapjack began circling like a predatory shark, appraising her. Meanwhile, Hayward kept a nervous eye on the spot where Sarah had disintegrated. Often, when ghosts vanished in a shower of particles, they snapped back together moments later. It was like a spectral sneeze, an explosion of pure chaos that ended as abruptly as it began. "A flower shop sounds nice," Daisy replied, as a somewhat restrained smile flickered across her face. "Of course, I've always been partial to flowers." The woman didn't look much older than Sarah's ghost. Perhaps she was the owner's daughter? I was trying to think of a way to diplomatically ask the question when Daisy offered up the answer of her own accord. "I'm married to Alvin, the property owner. The property is in his name, but he is busy today, so I was the one who picked up the phone when Sandy called. I know the property pretty well, though. I actually rented it from Alvin back before we got married." "Well, since you're being so accommodating, you can start by telling us about the dead girl in the attic," Flapjack quipped, still circling the woman.
"It's not an attic, you dolt,"
Hayward replied, his mustache twitching. Ignoring the ghosts, I took a few steps into the room, buying myself a moment to get my thoughts together. The space is a little smaller than I wanted, but I think I could make it work. I shifted my weight and noted the potential repairs. Of course, I'd have to get an electrician in here to see if there's enough power to put in a decent-sized walk-in cooler. Those things can be energy guzzlers. And I want to redo the floors and paint. It looks like maybe there was some damage here. I stopped and gestured at one of the smooth patches where the wall hadn't been textured to match. Daisy's expression tensed subtly. She offered the tiniest nod, then folded her arms over her chest, her slight frame enveloped in a rain jacket that looked 2 sizes too large. "The former tenant didn't leave things in the best condition," she replied. "I see," I replied, unsure if she meant Sarah. "Is that why your husband got rid of her?" Flapjack asked, taking on the affect of an old-school detective. All he needed was a little notepad and a stubby pencil. "I'm sure we could make arrangements to have something done about the floors," Daisy continued, lowering her gaze to the space between our shoes. Mine were a pair of casual ballet flats in a dusky rose color, and hers were well-worn sneakers that used to be white. "Maybe we could knock something off the first couple months' rent to get them polished up a bit. And you're more than welcome to paint, although I don't think Alvin will pay for it, being cosmetic and all." An argument bubbled up in my throat, but I shoved it down. It wasn't really the point, especially when we were presumably talking about renting from an accused murderer. "What was the shop before?" I asked, loading bait onto the question. "Well, there was a sandwich shop that gave it a go, but they couldn't get enough traffic. Not a huge demand for cold sandwiches in this part of town. But they did have a pretty big refrigerator, so perhaps that answers your question about the cooler. Of course, you're more than welcome to bring in an electrician." I nodded. "I see. So I shouldn't expect a lot of foot traffic then? I asked, looking out the window, beyond the woman's slim shoulder. Since arriving, I'd only spotted a handful of passing cars and pedestrians on the sidewalk beyond. Maybe not this time of year, Daisy admitted, turning her head to follow my gaze outside. But in the summertime, this whole town looks different. Plenty of business then, I can assure you. I wasn't entirely sure how much that would help me. After all, tourists weren't often in the market for pricey floral arrangements. But then perhaps the hotel and bed and breakfasts in town would spring for some arrangements to spruce up their lobbies and guest suites prior to the busy season. I also imagined there was a wedding venue somewhere, as getting married on or near the beach was always popular, even in the more rustic setting of the Pacific Northwest, where it wasn't white sand and palm trees, but frigid waters and evergreens. Did you want to see the apartment upstairs? It comes with the rental. If you don't want to use it as a living space, you could use it for storage. We've had a few tenants who've done that. I shifted a glance toward Hayward, silently asking the question. He gave a tight nod.
I promise, Lady Scarlet, not so much as a drop of blood.
Lead the way, I said. Daisy cut through the shop, her stride taking on a more confident pace as she flicked a switch. There's a private parking lot out back, just for people who live and work in these buildings. And there's an external staircase that also serves as a fire exit, she continued. Once in the back, Daisy opened the metal security door, revealing a carpeted set of stairs with fluorescent lighting overhead. It wasn't updated or anything to write home about, but then I'd already met the resident ghost, so really, how much worse could it be? We ascended the stairs, and Daisy let me inside the apartment, hanging back as I walked through the small space. True to Hayward's word, there were no bloodstains to be found, and apart from some dust and cobwebs, the place was relatively clean. The kitchen was small but functional, with enough room to put a small dining set. The living room had a decent-sized window that looked out onto the street below, and while I couldn't get an ocean view with these prices, there was a good chance that if I cracked open the window, the sound of the waves would reach me. That had to count for something. Mentally, it was easy enough to picture a small sideboard with a TV, a couch, a table, and maybe even room for a low bookshelf, and my collection of potted plants under the window. The bedroom was small, but large enough to fit a queen-sized bed and a pair of nightstands. The rental listing vastly oversold the closet space, but there were built-in baskets and hanging bars, which was a nice touch. Flapjack let out a low whine that sounded like a whistle. Quite a step down, eh, Scar? Can you imagine your mom's face if she came to visit? It might be worth taking the place just for that, honestly. He paused. Isn't she deathly allergic to Formica? Silently, I kicked out toward the cat, though my foot fell short of brushing through his spectral form.
It could be quite nice, Lady Scarlet, with some proper window treatments and a rug.
Hayward trailed off, brushing the toe of his shoe along the threshold.
Of course, interior decorating was never my forte. That was largely left to my dear Mary, and of course the staff.
Flapjack rolled his eyes. Oh, goody, a tale from Grandpappy. Hayward shot Flapjack a distressed look.
Perhaps you're jealous that I had an estate filled with agreeable staff.
Flapjack blew a raspberry. I was an adorable cat. I had people tripping over themselves to see to my every need. Isn't that right, Scar? I did my best to ignore them as I slid my hands into the back pockets of my faded jeans. I spun on my heel to face Daisy and offered a polite smile. It's nice. I appreciate you taking the time to show me around. I've got a couple of other places to visit. I mean, have you seen the internet? Flapjack continued, Humans are obsessed with cats.
They seem to be rather enamored with people like me, too,
Hayward countered.
Lady Scarlet, what's the name of that delightful program with the posh parties and stunning estate?
What's the best way to get in touch if I decide to go ahead? I asked Daisy. Should I call Sandy? Oh, are you sure you wouldn't like to see the lease agreement? I could run home and get it. I'm only a few minutes away. Daisy's sudden eagerness threw me for a loop. Oh, well, like I said, I need to get an electrician in and... Oh, I'm sure it's fine. I could bring the paperwork to your hotel this afternoon or later tonight. I'm assuming you're staying somewhere in town? I held up a hand. I'm not sure yet. I need more time to think. Daisy's brows furrowed, her chin drooping as her eyes nearly fluttered closed. Of course, I'm so sorry. Here, let me show you out, she said. Before I could say anything more, she marched down the stairs and out of earshot. That was weird, I whispered out of the corner of my mouth. Well, she's married to a murderer, Scar. What do you really expect? Flapjack asked, before swan diving through the stairs. Do you think I should go find Sarah? I asked Hayward. It seems like we might need to ask her some more questions before we leave. Hayward nodded, his shoulders rolling back as he straightened to his full height.
I shall do my best.
With that, he dashed away, leaving me alone with the maybe murderer's wife. What could go wrong? Chapter 6. After sending Hayward on his covert mission, not all that taxing considering he was invisible to everyone but me, I descended the stairs with Flapjack in tow, stopping short of the last steps when Daisy's muffled voice reached me. Got the voicemail and decided I would handle it myself. I want this place rented out every bit as much as you do, Alvin. I figured you were off drinking somewhere anyway, she hissed. I hung back, awkwardly caught between wanting to get the heck out of the shop but also not wanting to intrude on what seemed like a private conversation. Flapjack, however, had no such qualms. The ghostly Himalayan barreled forward, leaving the stairwell and darting around the corner out of sight with a mischievous little snicker. Flapjack! I whisper shouted, to no avail. Naturally. Then next time you pick up the phone, Daisy exclaimed. I flinched. Oh boy. Coast's clear, Scar, Flapjack called, still sounding thoroughly amused with himself. Exhaling, I took the last few steps, the bottom one squeaking underfoot, then joined Daisy in the empty shop, glancing down at my own phone as though I'd been absorbed in thought and hadn't overheard her half of the heated conversation. Sorry about that, Daisy said. I glanced up, and she raked a hand through her slightly bedraggled hair and turned back to face me, pasting a smile back in place. I guess I'd better lock up, unless there's anything else you wanted to see? I shook my head. I think I'm all set, but thank you. I gestured toward the silver key I'd placed on the front counter upon arriving. That's the key from the coded lockbox? Daisy nodded. Right, of course. Thank you. She dug into her purse, then passed me a business card. That's our direct number. If you think of any questions or want to set up a time to get an electrician in here, Alvin might know someone he could recommend. I pocketed the card and nodded. Thanks. Following another awkward nod and a second set of stilted goodbyes, I slipped past Daisy and exited the shop, glancing both ways up and down the street and sidewalk for any sign of Hayward and Sarah. Phew, I can breathe again, Flapjack exclaimed. The air in there was a little thick with all that desperation hanging around, wouldn't you say? Be nice, I chided him, and you don't even need to breathe. With a chuckle/wheeze, he strutted down the sidewalk with renewed purpose, casting a curious eye at the neat line of trees along the street and the hanging baskets dangling from the street lamps, bursting with yellow and orange mums. A few of the other shops on Hydrangea Lane were decorated for Halloween, with the usual skeletons, pumpkins, witches' hats, and, of course, ghosts. Following after my own personal ghostie, the kind that lingered 365 days of the year, I added, "She's clearly in a bad spot, although I'm not sure why they're having trouble renting it out. Sarah seems like a nice enough ghost. I wonder what else has been going on around here to make people think it's spooky. Maybe people just don't want to think about being somewhere a murder took place. Superstition isn't always drenched in reality, Scar." I canted my head and kept walking, silently awarding him the point. On the plus side, we could probably coexist with her, the dead one, I mean, as long as she agreed to stay downstairs. I require privacy and complete silence for my cat naps. I wonder if she would enjoy the scent of tuna in the morning. I rolled my eyes toward the sky, which had turned gray again as the sun began its descent. The double scoop of Rocky Road, while delicious, hadn't done much to satiate my hunger. I needed a proper meal. Dealing with Flapjack required ample amounts of protein to keep my brain from turning into a puddle of goo. Where was that burger place we saw? Think it's walkable from here? I had a rental car, of course, as Beachwood Harbor was a solid 3-hour drive from the SeaTac airport. But I couldn't remember if I'd seen the burger place when walking through town earlier that day, or if I'd noticed it on the initial drive into town a few days back. Why are you asking me? Do I look like a walking, talking GPS? Maybe you should ask that hippie chick Hayward's crushing on. He snickered at his own little joke as he swirled around the base of a stop sign. What was that all about, anyway? Have you ever seen him get all googly-eyed like that before? Despite myself, I smiled. I don't think so. Watching him stumble all over himself and try to figure out where to look was rather amusing. Possibly even better than when you dragged him through Amsterdam's red light district. That drew a full laugh, and I covered my face with one hand. That was an accident. I didn't realize which street I was turning onto. Yeah, sure, Scar. You keep telling yourself that. I laughed again at the memory of Hayward's horrified expression and the way he tried to disappear into his top hat, then hoisted my purse a little higher on my shoulder and set out for the hotel. The binder of hotel policies and information also included the takeout menus for most of the local restaurants, and I imagine the burger joint was among them. Speaking of getting lost, do you think Hayward can find his way back to the hotel from here? If he can't, it's his own fault. Flapjack replied with a swish of his tail. This place is pretty small. Although, I've been thinking, maybe you're right. Oh? My ears perked. Maybe this whole small-town life thing wouldn't be so bad. Are you sure you want to fly home tomorrow? I wanted to ask him why the change of heart, but a trio of teenagers was walking toward me, crossing at the same intersection. Somewhat involuntarily, my gaze roved back over my shoulder to the empty storefront, and a little twinge pulled inside my chest as I took in the full picture of the quaint street. It was all too easy to envision the place, especially in spring, with bright petunias spilling from the hanging baskets on the street lamps, the trees with delicate pink petals and bright green leaves, and the happy comings and goings of families and tourists wandering up and down the streets after a day spent enjoying the beach. I drew in a deep breath of salty air and turned to find Flapjack stopped in the middle of the sidewalk, staring up at me. I know that look, he said, canting his head to one side. Granted, I haven't seen it since you were dating back in high school. I groaned, then glanced to see the teens were out of earshot. This is not the time, Flapjack, I hissed. I'm just saying, you look like you're in love. I sighed and kept walking a few paces, my mind churning. So what's the plan then? Rent a shop and apartment from a possible murderer? Because on a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being off the rails bad, that idea ranks as a -3. He murdered the last single female tenant who occupied the space. And you think I should just throw myself right into that lion's den? No thanks. What if it wasn't him? You know better than most how ghost memories can go a little on the fritz, especially the traumatized ones. I opened my mouth to argue, only to clamp it shut again. He was right. Ghost memories did sometimes get a bit wonky. The time between death and what could generously be described as rebirth often had some bumps in the road. Some people passed away and reappeared so quickly their last breath still lingered in the room, while others could take days, or sometimes even weeks, to hit the metaphysical wall between this realm and whatever lay beyond and rebound back to the land of the living. The cause of death could also have an impact. Sometimes there was an almost amnesia-like syndrome that could dull even the sharpest of minds once in their post-death form. Head traumas, sudden accidents, or really anything that blocked oxygen to the brain for any significant amount of time, all could lead to memory gaps. And that was to say nothing of the effect of general trauma. If the death was particularly traumatic, as was the case with most murder victims, that too could impact the clarity of their memories from life. Or death. I swiveled my gaze toward Flapjack. So what are you saying? I should launch an impromptu murder investigation? Oh, come on. Don't tell me you haven't already thought about it. Even if there wasn't a sweet little rental tied up in this deal, you can't tell me you're 100% fine just walking away and leaving Sarah here. You have a soft spot for the tethered ghosts. Again, he had me pegged. I suppose after 2 decades together, it was hard to get one past the pint-sized cat. My shoulders slumped, signaling imminent defeat. Flapjack chuckled. I eyed him. Fine. If Hayward finds her and brings her back to the hotel, I might have some follow-up questions, and could perhaps come up with a plan to get to the bottom of what really happened. But if it's a closed case, there's no way in Hades I'm renting that shop. Fair enough. He floated ahead, his tail swishing in the breeze he couldn't feel. Oh, and Scarlet, I called dibs on the bed tonight. Stuffy britches can sleep in the bathtub. I was halfway through ordering a pickup order from McNally's Pub when Hayward and Sarah found their way to the Seahorse Hotel. They popped through the front door just as I finished rattling off the last bit of my credit card information. Setting the phone down on the bed, I turned to face them, my gaze fixed on Sarah. Okay, what was with the Houdini routine back there? Hayward gave Sarah a meaningful glance, then floated across the room, giving her space, or perhaps making her the center of attention. Sarah watched him go, then swayed back around to face me. I'm sorry. I just really don't like seeing her. Daisy? The spirit nodded. She wasn't my favorite person in life, at least not towards the end. And seeing her on this side of things tends to stir up unpleasant feelings. More unpleasant than the ones you feel when you leave the boundaries of the shop?
She didn't go far,
Hayward said solemnly.
I found her at a park a couple of blocks from the shop.
A smile tugged at one corner of Sarah's mouth. I like the pond there. In springtime, there's all these lily pads and ducks. I always liked the lily pads. What's the story with Daisy? You two didn't get along? Sarah shook her head. I only spoke with her a handful of times when I'd call looking for Alvin and she'd pick up the phone and take down my message. Somewhere along the way, Daisy apparently got it in her head
that Alvin and I were having some kind of torrid affair behind her back. I think it was because he started hanging around at the shop more often, hovering and making sure I was doing his bidding. Sarah rolled her eyes. Anyway, she came in, ranting and raving at me to leave her man alone. As if I'd want that old toad, with his greasy slicked back hair, chewing tobacco always in his mouth, and his little fingers. She shuddered. So what did you tell her? Basically just that, Sarah said bluntly. I told her she was crazy if she thought any woman would want to steal Alvin from her, and frankly, she could do a lot better. I winced. I can't imagine that went over well. Sarah shrugged. It wasn't my finest moment, but I'm not sure how I was supposed to react, considering she came in swinging these wild accusations out of nowhere. Okay, so you and Daisy weren't on good terms. What was the deal with Alvin? Was he just a total sleazeball or what? Ghosts don't technically have a need to breathe, biologically speaking, but as with other things from life, the act of breathing could have its own sort of muscle memory. So, when Sarah exhaled, her whole form shimmered and sagged until she looked something like a deflated mylar balloon suspended in the middle of the room. It's a long story. I checked the time on my phone. I have 15 minutes till I have to go pick up my burger. Apparently they're pretty busy tonight. Sarah looked up. McNally's? I nodded. Sarah groaned and clutched her stomach. Oh, what I wouldn't give for another McNally's burger. Sorry. A guilty pang bit into me. You were saying? Sarah straightened somewhat, though her expression remained tense. I was using the shop as a vintage boutique. I'd go around to thrift shops and scour places like eBay to find vintage clothing for cheap. Then I'd occasionally do repairs or slight alterations and sell it in my boutique. I also had my own online shop so people from out of state could peruse my inventory. Business was steady, but I hit a rough patch, personally, and I got into a bit of a pickle. Sarah began pacing, her shimmering form sweeping back and forth across the small room. I couldn't pay my rent, but I knew a couple of good sales would get me topside again. Alvin was understanding. At first, but then something changed. It was like a switch flipped, and he just got mean. He started getting really pushy and calling me at all hours and leaving notes everywhere. One night he showed up at the apartment, reeking of booze, and demanding that I give him the money. When I told him I didn't have it, he started screaming at me. That sounds scary. Sarah nodded. It was, believe me. Eventually, he kind of tuckered himself out and left before I had to call the cops. He showed up the next morning, a little worse for wear, of course, but in a much calmer state of mind. He apologized for the outburst, but told me he couldn't just take the hit on the rent, but that he'd come up with a way I could pay him back. I braced myself, sensing where this was going. Sarah, realizing how she sounded, jolted. No, not like that. But let's just say Alvin's businesses weren't always on the up and up. And somewhere along the line, he got it into his head that he could sell fake designer handbags for real designer handbag prices. He had a whole storage shed full of the things, and he wanted me to help him move them. He said my established boutique had a good reputation and that I could pass them off without anyone questioning it. And if I helped him sell all the bags, he'd count my debt as paid in full. Oh, the perfect plan. What could go wrong? Flapjack quipped from his place beside the TV. I shot him a look, but kept silent, leaving space for Sarah to continue. It was dumb, I know. But what choice did I have? He could have taken me to court, and whatever job I managed to find would garnish my wages. Not to mention, I didn't have anywhere else to go. My family lives on the East Coast, and while I made a few friends in town, none of them were the crash on their couch for months on end type of friends. Alvin was kind of my only chance. So I told him I would help him sell his stupid bags. And for a while it was fine. I sold them to people online mostly. But then Alvin insisted on putting a display up in the front window of the shop. And it's not like I could say no, right? Someone found out? I ventured. It took a little while, but yes, eventually I had one very angry customer coming in and threatening to expose the entire scheme. And in a town like Beachwood Harbor, it doesn't take long for gossip to spread like wildfire. My entire business would be at risk. It doesn't take much these days to get an angry internet mob up and running, and a couple dozen bad reviews would tank much of my online business too. In hindsight, I should have kept Alvin's bag business separate, at least online, but I was worried he'd find out and blow up at me again. So what did you do? I had to give her a refund, which of course put me even more in the red. The whole thing was just a mess. And then, a few days before I died, there was some sort of mix-up. Alvin brought in a load of purses and left them for me to price and photograph. In the process, I realized that one of them was genuine. I checked all the signs, the stitching, the material, the placement of the buckles. It was the real deal. I even ran it by one of my online contacts just to make sure I wasn't missing something, and they said it looked real to them too. The bag would have been listed for $40,000 full retail. It was something way above and beyond the stuff Alvin was bringing me. Most of them were like $1,500 to $3,000. He wasn't shooting for the super high-end stuff. It's easier and safer to move the mid-priced bags. And he had no idea it was real? Sarah laughed, the sound dry and hollow. Guess that answers that question, Scar. Flapjack interjected. Sorry, I don't mean to be rude, but no. Safe to say, Alvin had no idea what he had on his hands. So, I hid that bag in an air vent at the shop, under a stack of boxes. She huffed a dry laugh. It's still there. I swear, half of my life as a ghost has been spent worried he'd come and find it after all this time. It was meant to be my ticket out. Literally, I was going to sell it and use the money to get me as far away from Alvin and this whole mess as I could. But he found out about the mix-up. Sarah sank once more, her feet nearly slipping through the low-pile carpeting. I still don't know exactly what happened, but somehow, Alvin found out about the real bag. He came into the shop, telling me he needed me to come to the storage unit and help him find it because if I didn't, some very bad people were going to come and make his life a living hell. Why did he need you to go to the storage facility? Couldn't he just look at a picture or something? Sarah shrugged. Chalk it up to laziness. And he didn't always think clearly, especially when he was in a panic. And he was definitely in a panic, believe me. I can imagine. I went with him. We spent the better part of an afternoon tearing apart his entire storage facility, opening boxes upon boxes of fake bags. I honestly had no idea there were so many of them. Of course, the real bag wasn't there. He wanted to go through everything again, but it was late, and I was tired, not to mention cold. I told him he was welcome to keep looking, but that I was done. I went home, made myself some dinner, and went to bed, thinking I needed to move up my plans to get out of town before he could realize what had happened. I maxed out my last credit card to buy a plane ticket back east, packed up just enough clothing to get me through a few days, and put the most expensive of my vintage inventory into the trunk of my car. I was all set, ready to leave as soon as the sun was up. My stomach twisted. having a feeling I knew what was coming next. Sarah met my gaze, her eyes piercing and haunted. And that was the night I was murdered. Chapter 7. Sarah's declaration hung heavy in the quiet of the hotel room, the reality of it dark and hard to wrap my mind around. "I'm so sorry, Sarah," I finally managed. "Do you know how it happened? It's okay if you don't want to get into all the details, of course." From his perch, Flapjack sat silent, his tail only softly swishing. I could always gauge a situation based on Flapjack's commentary, or, in this case, the lack thereof. When his commentary ran dry, I knew it was serious. "I can talk about it," Sarah replied, her voice wavering but clear. "I went to bed, but I don't think I was asleep for long before I woke up to the sound of something breaking downstairs. It sounded like glass shattering. I grabbed my phone and the baseball bat I'd started keeping under my bed after Alvin's drunken tirade." I nodded. During my globe-trotting days, I'd stayed in some rough hostels, and I knew the feeling of wanting a bit of protection. While I didn't travel with a baseball bat in my backpack, I tended to keep a small canister of pepper spray on hand just in case. "Anyway," Sarah continued, giving her head a slight shake, "I got the baseball bat and went downstairs. And there was Alvin, dressed all in black with a ski mask covering his face. But I knew it was him. A rack of clothing had fallen over and broken the glass display case where I kept some of the more expensive pieces of jewelry. I lifted the baseball bat and told him to get the hell out of my shop. When he didn't move, I started to call 911, and he lunged at me. We fought, but he knocked the baseball bat out of my hand and twisted my wrist behind my back. He was a lot stronger than I would have imagined. He's not a super large guy, kind of lanky and stringy, but I guess adrenaline allows people to do things they wouldn't normally be capable of. He got his hands around my neck and started squeezing. And then Sarah stopped, her chin wobbling, as one hand absently went to the neckline of her baggy t-shirt. That was it, I guess. When I came back or woke up or whatever you call it, I was floating in the shop, and there were police and paramedics. But it was too late. I saw myself. Sarah's voice broke. She clamped her mouth shut to bite back a full sob. I held out my hand. "It's okay, Sarah. You don't have to tell me the rest. I'm really sorry this happened to you." "How do you know it was Alvin, if you couldn't see his face and he didn't say anything?" Flapjack asked, leaning forward slightly. Sarah looked at the cat, her brows lifting. Who else could it have been? He was clearly there looking for the purse. He thought I'd put it with the other bags and in his bumbling manner knocked over the display. It was his building, technically speaking. He had a key, and you knew he was looking for the bag. So, if he thought it was at your shop, why would he need to go all Mission Impossible and sneak in while you were sleeping? And if he wanted the bag that much, enough to kill for it, why not demand you give it to him? Why attack you? Sarah opened her mouth, then promptly closed it. She then looked at me. I don't know. I wasn't inside his head. He was desperate and had some really bad people after him. He wasn't thinking clearly. No one else knew about the bag, so they couldn't have known to look for it in my shop. What if his associates knew he had the real bag? Would they have known about your shop? Maybe whoever was supplying the bags to Alvin sent them to look for it themselves. Maybe they didn't believe that Alvin didn't know where it was. Sarah shook her head. He was the same height and build as Alvin. It just seems too much of a coincidence. I nodded.
But Flapjack's question still rolled through my mind. Leaning forward, I braced my elbows on my thighs and looked up at Sarah. Listen, with a situation like this, it might be impossible to prove what actually happened that night. I assume the police talked to Alvin, and he must have had some sort of alibi, as he would have been the most obvious suspect. I'm not a private investigator, and I don't know anyone in town to try and get information from. I want to help you, Sarah, I really do, but this is a bit out of my league, at least as far as helping you get justice. But, that being said, I could potentially help you live a more full life as a ghost. You mentioned earlier that you find it hard or uncomfortable to leave the shop for long periods of time, right? Sarah looked crestfallen, her chin tucked, but she offered a small nod. I don't think I can help you resolve things to become wholly at peace with what happened to you. But I do think there's one thing we could try in an effort to get you untethered. So you're saying I'm stuck as a ghost until they solve a murder investigation they've already closed? Sarah said, distress showing in the lines around her mouth and eyes. Not necessarily. It doesn't always come down to solving a murder investigation. Sometimes, ghosts just need time to make peace with their life and death, even if that means coming to terms with the injustice of it. But I do think it's important for you to get away from the shop, away from the memories tangled up there. You might go on to live, so to speak, a more enriched life as a ghost once you leave that place behind. Would you like to try? It depends. What is it you think I should do? You mentioned putting the bag in an air vent to keep it hidden before you could leave, and that you spent a lot of time and energy worrying that Alvin might stumble across it, right? Sarah's eyes drifted past me, looking out the window of the motel room. She ran her fingers over her bare arms, almost itching at her skin. I think we should give it back. Sarah snapped to attention and exploded into a tirade of arguments, loud enough that both Flapjack and Hayward surged back several feet from her in either direction. "Are you crazy?" she exclaimed. "Oh, wait, I know what this is. You just want the bag for yourself. You're coming in here telling me this is all for my own good as long as I hand over a handbag I just told you is worth $40,000. This is just some sort of scam, isn't it? I can't believe I actually thought you wanted to help me." I got to my feet. Sarah, I don't want the bag for myself. I just think this whole mess, with Alvin and the bag and all these bad memories, is all tangled up into an impossible knot. And in your situation, for better or worse, giving up the bag is the only thread you can pull to try and untangle it. It's not like the bag is doing you any good in an air vent, is it? There's no such thing as currency in the spirit realm. Alvin murdered me to get that bag. And now you want me to let him get away with murder and give him the very thing he killed for? How is that supposed to make me feel better? I know it seems counterintuitive, but think of it this way. It's not about giving something to him. It's about removing yourself, and therefore perhaps your spirit, from this whole mess. I won't do it, Sarah sniffed. Hayward floated closer, his gloved hands wringing together.
It's not what you wanted to hear, Lady Sarah, but I do think Lady Scarlet has the heart of it pinned down. Your spirit doesn't want him to find the bag, and the bag is here in this place, so perhaps subconsciously, the bag is the anchor holding you back. Try not to think of it as that awful scoundrel getting his way, but rather a way to get your own freedom. Sarah's expression softened a little, though skepticism lingered in her silvery eyes.
I've been a spirit myself for well over 100 years, and I can tell you there's much to do, even without a body. So many people to meet, places to go, things to see. In life, you spend so much time worrying about time itself. As a ghost, there's none of that. Your mind is free from constraints and able to more fully indulge your every curiosity. It's rather wonderful, once you get past the initial shock and grief of death.
Sarah considered this, then slowly turned and looked at Flapjack. And hey, at least you get to keep your sense of smell, he added. I squeezed my eyes shut for a moment, not entirely sure that was the selling point that would really tip her over the edge. You really think it's an anchor? Sarah asked, directing her attention back toward me. I met her gaze and nodded solemnly. Hayward did a much better job of explaining it. I shot the old gentleman my thanks and a quiet smile. He tipped his top hat in my direction, then floated back to his corner. If we get rid of the anchor, regardless of where it goes, I think that would help put your spirit at ease. What do you think? Sarah floated back and forth across the room, her silvery hair flowing behind her as she considered her options. When she finally stopped, she swirled back around to face me, her shoulders sagging. Okay, I'll do it. I'll show you where I hid the bag. Do you want to be there when he comes to collect it, or would you rather we leave it for him to find? I offered. A new strength seemed to flood through Sarah as she straightened, her jawline set with determination. I want to see him. One last time. He might not be able to hear me, but I want to tell him what I think of him. I nodded. Okay, let's head over there to get the bag. I can call the number Daisy gave me this afternoon. Sarah floated ahead, pausing near the door while I pulled on my rain jacket. Twilight had fallen over the coastal town, and soft raindrops pattered on the roof overhead. For a moment, I thought of my burger, across town and likely getting cold in the bottom of a grease-splattered takeout bag. But then, some things were more important. You ready? I asked Sarah, as I approached the door, tugging my purse strap a little higher onto my shoulder. She met my gaze and nodded, then vanished through the door. Chapter 8. Within 10 minutes, the four of us, though it looked like just the one of me, arrived back at the vacant shop. The combo on the real estate lockbox was unchanged, and I quickly let myself into the shop and ducked out of the rain. Another wave of bittersweet emotions washed over me as we stepped inside. The street lamps from the sidewalk streamed inviting circles of yellow light into the blank space, and with the rain running down the windows and the warm glow of the light, it was all too easy to imagine what it might be like to call the space my own. The soft light and hollow shadows concealed the flaws I'd noticed earlier in the day, and I found myself picturing the place filled with plants and flowers, and a cozy little table with a couple of upholstered chairs. The shop was not on the downtown strip, but Beachwood Harbor was an incredibly walkable town, and even on the walk from the hotel, we passed several locals coming and going from the other small businesses. Everyone had a smile or a simple greeting as they passed, and I wondered what it would be like to live in a town where everyone knew everyone, where I wouldn't be just another small business owner, but a real member of the thriving community. The draw of the town was stronger in twilight, with its cozy shops and rustic beauty, the distant sound of the crashing waves and the smell of the ocean. It was undeniably appealing. But I did my best to shove my own personal longings to the side,
It wasn't about my future or what I would do next. There'd be time for that in the morning, while I packed up and prepared for the drive to the airport. "It's back here," Sarah said, her silvery silhouette cutting through the shadows between the halos of light. I didn't bother turning on the overhead lights, assuming the electricity was even turned on, and used the light on my phone to guide the way. Sarah hovered near the vent in question, a register in the floor with a metal grate. "Here it is," she said, glancing down. Kneeling, I lifted the grate out of the floor and set it to the side, then reached in and grabbed a parcel no bigger than a loaf of store-bought bread. I rocked back onto my feet while I unwrapped the bundle, finding she'd used a plain black t-shirt to protect and conceal the handbag. "I didn't have a proper dust bag," Sarah explained offhandedly. The lavender-hued clutch was simple enough, with quilted stitching and supple leather, and a silver plate bearing the designer's stamp. It was fine quality, but rather simple in design. "That thing is worth $40,000, Flapjack exclaimed as he zoomed closer to inspect it, his whiskers twitching. Part of me was grateful he'd said it. Even growing up around high fashion, I'd never fully understood what made one bag worth $100 and another worth $10,000. There were people who could explain all the intricate differences, I knew, but it never held much interest for me. Personally, if I had $10,000, I'd spend it on a trip or some type of experience, not a bag I might get around to using once or twice a year. Not to mention, these things went in and out of season, making them a rather unsound investment in my estimation. Sarah nodded. "It's a limited edition. There are only a couple of hundred of them, which drives the prices up like crazy. I think it's because of the unique coloring. The dyeing is very precise. It looks like it fell into a garbage can at the county fair," Flapjack replied. "You know, the one where all the kids go to barf up their cotton candy after getting off the roller coaster." "Thank you for that colorful imagery," I quipped to the cat, as I wrapped the purse back up with the t-shirt. I set it aside and replaced the register grate before getting to my feet. "I'll give Daisy a call and let her know the bag is here for Alvin to collect. It's the best way to handle this, I think." Sarah seemed to brace herself, nodding slowly. "Okay, do what you think is best."
"Perhaps you should leave it upstairs, Lady Scarlet. It seems like that might be the most secure place to leave it,"
Hayward suggested. "Good idea. Let's see if I can get Alvin on the phone." I took out my phone and dialed the number from the card Daisy had given me. 3 rings led to an answering machine, with a male voice declaring it was Alvin and Daisy's. Then, the beep. I shifted a glance to Sarah before I rattled off my message. "Hello, this is Scarlett Sanderson. I was the one who stopped by the vacant shop on Hydrangea Lane earlier today. I came back to the shop to take some measurements, and when I was in the back room, something caught my eye in the bottom of the air vent, and it looks like a handbag?" Flapjack snickered at my terrible attempt to act my way through this discovery. Hayward flapped a gloved hand in the cat's direction, which Flapjack expertly dodged. "Anyway, I'm just going to leave it upstairs in the apartment in case it belongs to you. Unfortunately, I think the rental is a little smaller than I was hoping, so I'm going to have to pass. But please thank Daisy for her time and for showing me around this afternoon. Goodbye." I hung up and glared at Flapjack. "Do you mind?" "Do I ever?" I groaned. "So, what now?" Sarah asked, twisting her hands together in front of her as she floated to look out the front window. "Should I stay here and wait for him?" My stomach gurgled, the longing for my abandoned burger returning. "I suppose we could wait a little while? It doesn't seem like they lived all that far away," I said, considering how quickly Daisy had arrived at the shop earlier that afternoon after Sandy called to tell her about a potential tenant. But I don't think they were home, or maybe they just don't answer unknown numbers. I chewed on my lower lip, wondering if I should give Sarah a more firm deadline. As much as I wanted to help, I couldn't stay camped out here until midnight. I needed to eat something, get back to the hotel, purchase my plane ticket home, and try to get a decent amount of sleep. The flight from Seattle to Tucson wasn't grueling, but I always tried to get a good night's sleep before flying anywhere. Not to mention I'd have to deal with my mother in less than 24 hours and would need all the strength I could muster for that. I was about to tell Sarah I could wait for 15 minutes when my phone buzzed, showing a number with a Seattle area code. Hello?
Oh, Scarlett! I'm glad I caught you, came Sandy's voice.
Oh, hi, Sandy. Did a property come up? I turned and started to walk back into the storeroom/studio space, running my fingertips along the wall.
Possibly. I was at a Beachwood Chamber of Commerce small business night, something I always try to do. And there's a stained glass artist who has been working out of her home garage for the past couple of years, but now she's looking to get into a proper space. As we got to talking, I realized she is in a similar situation as you, where she doesn't want something too big and has specific alterations she needs to make to suit her needs. Anyway, it got me thinking that maybe we could circle back to that warehouse over on Azalea Street. It would give you both plenty of room to work, and you could split the rent and utilities. And then, perhaps the old shoe store on Marigold would work for just a retail space. It's a little outside the box, I'll admit, but I crunched the numbers, and if you split the rent 50-50 with Megan, that's the artist, you could afford to do both. So what do you think?
Sandy's enthusiasm was contagious, but half a dozen questions popped into my mind at the proposal, not the least of which was whether it was wise to go into business with someone I'd never met before in a town I'd never lived in, and whether it made sense to straddle my business between two separate properties, even in a small town. It's an interesting idea, I said, stopping in place as my mind kept spinning. But I wasn't planning to have employees, at least not right out of the gate. I'm not sure how practical it would be to try and split my time between two locations. When foot traffic is down, it would be nice to have a space to go and work while I wait on customers. I couldn't really do that if my workspace was across town.
Oh.
All light drained from Sandy's tone, and I almost felt guilty over rupturing her bubble.
Right.
I mean, maybe I could take buckets over to the retail shop? It did have that smaller back room area.
Scarlett?
Flapjack's voice called to me from the front. Oh, hold on 1 second, Sandy. Can I put you on hold?
Of course.
I lowered the phone from my ear and tapped the mute button as I went out to see what Flapjack needed.
She's here,
Flapjack exclaimed, as Sarah added, Daisy's here. I stepped out into the main room and found Daisy in the doorway. What are you doing here? She demanded, flinching at my sudden arrival. I just left a voicemail for you.
Where is the bag?
Daisy demanded, her tone sharp and wolfish. Oh, it's just in the back, here, I said, turning around.
Just give it to me,
Daisy snapped, twitching as she glanced over her shoulder. Frowning, I paused. I was planning on it.
What's her deal?
Flapjack asked, looking at Sarah. Daisy swore and moved to block the door, just as a man appeared in the front window. That's Alvin, Sarah exclaimed. Daisy tugged frantically at the pocket of her too large coat, pulling out a small pocket knife. She flipped it open, revealing the small blade, just as the door opened, and Alvin stepped inside. It's mine, Alvin. You owe me this. Alvin, jumped back as she swung at him, the knife out. "What the hell are you doing here?"
I got the voicemail about the bag.
He took his eyes from the glint off the blade long enough to take note of my presence.
She's the one who found it?
"It doesn't matter," Daisy said, swinging around toward me. "Give me the bag and no one gets hurt," she demanded. Sarah, Hayward, and Flapjack all screamed, of course unnoticed by Daisy. Quickly, I tapped the unmute button on the call with Sandy, keeping the screen toward the back of the shop. "Daisy, please? Put down the knife," I said, desperately hoping Sandy could hear me. "I just came by the property to take some measurements. I'm not here to steal anything from you."
Lady Scarlet, just do as she says,
Hayward exclaimed, clearly beside himself as he surged in front of Daisy to no avail. She couldn't see him, and none of their ghostly distractions would serve to stop her.
How did you even know about the bag?
Alvin asked his wife, staying rooted by the front door. Flapjack tried to ram into Daisy but floated right through her. Daisy shuddered, but didn't lower the knife as she whirled to face her husband again. "I know everything that goes on around here. You think you're so smart and sneaky, but let me tell you, I didn't marry you for your brains."
Put the knife down, you crazy.
Daisy's hand jerked up, pointing the knife at Alvin's throat. "Don't you say it." Alvin gulped. "I married you because I didn't have a choice. I had Davy to think about. And what about you? You squandered all of your choices. Meanwhile, I wound up working 2 jobs just to keep groceries in the fridge, while you were running around with other women and getting into business with wannabe gangsters. You were going to ruin our entire life."
You can't take that bag,
Alvin said.
If JC finds out I let you take it, he'll kill me.
"You should have thought about that before you let that little Jezebel steal it. But it's my turn now. She didn't deserve it. Stupid girl, willing to die for something that didn't even belong to her." Alvin reared back, his eyes dark with horror and shadows.
It was you?
"Mark helped me. Or at least he was supposed to." Daisy's voice was brittle, harsh, and sharp. Stupid oaf got carried away. Said she tried to scream. Alvin didn't kill me?" Sarah stammered.
Sarah didn't deserve that,
Alvin said.
even if she did take the bag.
Sarah swooped closer, staring into Alvin's eyes. "Please?" I interjected, raising my voice even higher. "I will go and get the bag, but please, Daisy, put down the knife before anyone else gets hurt. I don't want to call the police," I added, putting emphasis on the final words. Unfortunately, a second phone call came in at that moment, lighting up the screen long enough for Daisy to realize what I had in my hand. "You're calling the police?" She lunged before I could answer, arcing the knife into the air.
Lady Scarlet, get down!
Suddenly, a whirl of silver erupted as Sarah's ghost swirled like a tornado, gathering all of the energy and warmth from the room into a cyclone of silvery particles. With an ear-piercing shriek, she lashed out, sending the particles in all directions until one of the front windows broke and the light bulbs overhead shattered, sending a spray of glass over the shadowy floors. Daisy yelped in confusion, distracted just long enough for me to take cover behind the front counter. Sandy, please call the police. I'm at the Hydrangea Lane property. Daisy is here. She has a knife." "I'm on it. They're on their way," Sandy replied. "Are you okay?" A scuffle sounded on the other side of the counter as Alvin wrestled with his wife. "You idiot!" Daisy shrieked. The knife skittered across the floor, and I sat paralyzed, hunkered behind the counter as the two swore and thrashed around. A thump sounded, and Daisy swore loudly. "Fine, we can split it," she hissed, through what sounded like gritted teeth. But we have to get out of here now. Sirens pierced the night, and Daisy hollered, "Alvin, please!"
I've made a lot of mistakes in my life, Daisy, and I'm sorry you suffered for some of them too. But this is bigger than that. You killed a woman. An innocent woman.
Innocent? Ha! I knew what the two of you were doing. It was written all over your face every time you'd come back from seeing her.
You're delusional. Sarah was too good for a guy like me.
I didn't dare to peek over the counter, but I hoped Sarah had reassembled herself in time to hear the confession. Another scuffle broke out as Daisy regained the advantage, and thundering footsteps sounded. I popped up just in time to see Daisy's silhouette streaking through the shadows between street lamps and into the night. Alvin roared and raced out after her, his shoes crunching over the broken glass from the light bulbs. I reached the sidewalk just as the cop car zoomed around the corner. Another benefit of small-town life, the police station was likely no more than a mile away from the downtown corridor. Daisy veered right and tried ducking into a restaurant, only to find the place closed for the night, the doors locked. Swearing, she bolted down the sidewalk and tried the next door, to no avail. In a blitz of activity, 2 uniformed officers appeared, weapons drawn, barking orders and demands until Daisy dropped her own weapon and sank to the sidewalk roughly, landing on her knees with a wince. She dissolved into a crumpled heap until 2 of the officers approached, one kicking the knife away, while the other moved to put her in handcuffs. "This is all his fault. You won't believe what he's driven me to," she exclaimed, her eyes blazing as Alvin raised his own hands. "We can talk about this at the station," the first officer said, directing one of the others to secure the scene as patrons of the cafe across the street started pressing up against its windows. "You have the right to remain silent," the second officer began, rattling off Daisy's Miranda rights before hauling her to her feet and marching her to the back of the squad car. Before they placed her inside, she caught an icy glare in my direction. A third officer approached me and Alvin, asking questions that barely registered in the chaos of my mind.
"Ma'am, are you okay? Are you hurt? There's an ambulance on the way,"
he stated, as more sirens joined the chorus ringing through the streets. I nodded feebly, still unsure exactly what had just occurred, but followed the officer to the side, out of earshot of Daisy's muffled threats and curses. Somewhere in the myriad of questions from a handful of officers trying to understand what happened, Gwen, the hippie ghost, appeared to survey the chaos, which I suppose was only to be expected, given her grasp of current events in the small town. I had a feeling a night like this would live in infamy for years, or even decades to come, and Gwen wouldn't want to miss a minute of it. Hayward, for one, seemed delighted to see her. Sarah was back, in shock, and paler than ever, as she watched the swarm of officers and passers-by descend on the scene. Hayward recounted the night to Gwen, with Flapjack interjecting minor corrections every few sentences, while I did my best to drown out their voices and focus on the questions the officers were asking me in rapid succession. Eventually, the officers let me go, and took Daisy and Alvin away to the station. They advised me to stay in town, if possible, in case more questions arose. But Sandy had arrived by then, and gave them her side of the story too, backing up my version of the events. Before she left, she offered to let me stay with her, so I didn't have to be alone, but I declined. Somewhere in the chaos, Sarah's ghost vanished, but Gwen remained and ended up following us back to the Seahorse Hotel. "You're sure you're okay?" she asked when we reached 2B. I nodded. "I will be. At least Sarah got her answer. I hope she's all right. That was a lot to handle." Gwen smiled warmly. Don't you worry about her. I'll take good care of her. If she wants space, she can have it, but if she ever needs a friend, I'll be there. Thank you. I take it you're not going to stick around Beachwood, all things considered? I shook my head. I don't think so. It's a wonderful town, but I'm not sure there's a place for me here. At least not for the time being. The hydrangea property would suit me, but I don't want to get tangled up with Alvin and Daisy. I left my number with Sandy in case something comes available. But for now, I'm headed back to Arizona. Gwen nodded. Well, if you ever change your mind, just know that you have a friend here, too. Thank you, Gwen, and good luck to you. Gwen smiled at each of us in turn, then said good night and floated out to spread the scuttlebutt far and wide. By dawn, every ghost in Beachwood Harbor would have the full report. I watched her go, then slipped into the hotel room and started to pack. It was time to go home. Epilogue. I think we should try the new sushi place. You've made that quite clear, Flapjack. Your vote has been recorded. I muttered to the spectral feline as he hovered over my shoulder, watching the screen of my laptop as I scrolled through the near-endless options for a quick dinner. I'd been back in Arizona for nearly a month, following my trip to Beachwood Harbor, and truth be told, I was still dreaming about the swaying pines, early morning walks along the shore, and the smell of saltwater taffy on the afternoon breeze. Do we really have to stay here all night? Flapjack asked, doing a backstroke across the living room. I want to go out and make fun of all the costumes. Caving, I gave in and clicked on the online menu for the sushi joint. If Flapjack didn't get at least one thing to break his way, I'd be in for it.
As Lady Scarlet has told you half a dozen times before, we're to stay here and hand out the candy.
Hayward chimed in. Thank you, I replied. At least someone listens to me. But it's Halloween. Who knows what sort of antics will be going on out there? You know this is when the veil between the realms is the thinnest. I choked on a laugh. Yeah? Why do you think I agreed to stay here and handle the trick-or-treaters? I want nothing to do with any sort of hocus-pocus nonsense tonight. Then, considering the two semi-transparent faces staring back at me, I amended. Well, any more than usual, anyway. My phone buzzed against the mahogany end table, and I blindly reached for it, assuming it would be my mother, ensuring I'd turned the porch light on, the universal symbol for, hey kids, we have candy. I didn't really know why she cared so much, but I had to assume there was some sort of ranking system within the neighborhood's HOA, and she wanted it known the Sandersons could afford to dole out king-size bars to every Mario, Princess Jasmine, Buzz Lightyear, and Spider-Man who came a-knockin'. She'd implored me to wear a costume, and I told her I was only interested in playing the part of the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man in a pair of my baggiest gray sweats. Hey, a ghost whisperer has to have a little fun every now and then, too. A Seattle number showed on the screen of my phone, and my brow creased as I accepted the call. Hello, this is Scarlet.
Hi, Scarlet, a warm voice replied. You might not remember me, but this is Sandy with Beachwood Realty.
Of course. Hi, Sandy, how are you?
I'm just great, thank you. Listen, I know it's been a little bit since we last chatted, but there was a new development with the property on Hydrangea Lane, and I wanted you to be the first to know.
Oh?
I shut my laptop. With everything that happened, Alvin and Daisy were forced to sell the place to help cover their legal fees. The paperwork hasn't been filed yet, but it's just a matter of getting the final signatures. Anyway, the new owner, a Beachwood local, plans to rent it out and asked me to get it listed. You can imagine his delight when I said I might already have a potential tenant lined up.
Her voice warmed further, the smile audible as she added,
Scarlet, the place is yours if you want it. You could be in business by the new year.
My heart flip-flopped, and I looked to Flapjack and Hayward, who had begun arguing over what movie to watch while we waited for the kids to arrive. It's Halloween, stuffy britches. We have to watch a spooky movie, Flapjack protested.
I think we should watch something educational,
Hayward replied, fussing with his cravat.
Perhaps as a compromise, we might find something about the history of All Hallows' Eve.
Flapjack blew a raspberry.
Scarlet, did I lose you?
Sorry. I jolted back to attention.
I'll take it. Excellent, Sandy hooted. I'll email the lease agreement first thing Monday morning. The sale will be completed by then.
Thanks, Sandy.
I really appreciate it. That's my job, dear. And may I be the first to say, welcome to Beachwood Harbor.
We said goodbye and hung up. It took a moment, but Flapjack eventually caught the dreamy look on my face and surged over, inspecting me like I was one of the fish at his favorite seafood counter. What's happened? I take it that wasn't your mother on the phone? Hayward, come over here, I said, beckoning him closer. When they both floated, before me, I clasped my hands together. I have news.
What is it, Lady Scarlet?
Yeah, spill. With a laugh, I nodded.
It looks like we're going back to Beachwood Harbor after all.
Hayward's cheeks shone deep purple.
We are? I wonder. Well, I suppose she might not remember me, but I wonder if Lady Gwen might consider giving me a proper tour this time.
Flapjack made a hairball hacking sound.
Oh, do be quiet,
Hayward huffed, before flying off in the direction of the kitchen. With a peal of wicked laughter, Flapjack pursued him. Hayward and Gwen sitting in a tree.
Now you're just being absurd. Why would we be in a tree?
You didn't let me finish the song. As the sound of their banter faded down the hallway, I raised my bottle of craft beer and toasted myself to new beginnings. Continue Scarlet's adventures in Beachwood Harbor with the ghost hunter next door. And if you'd like to meet the other paranormal residents of the small town, be sure to check out the Beachwood Harbor Magic Mysteries series too.